I'm also from Scotland, as you will probably hear. Um, as a journalist, so my question relates to women's rights specifically. So as a journalist, I've spoken to many feminists and particularly lesbians from the UK and the US who are very concerned about the implications of legally enshrined gender identity for women and children's sex-based rights and protections. So I'd like to ask if the First Minister understands woman to mean adult human female or as a person who identifies as a woman, and how Scotland plans on addressing some of the obvious concerns that come from this question.
Well, this is a very live debate in Scotland right now, as it is across the UK and in many other countries. Scotland has plans to bring forward legislation to simplify the process around gender recognition. It doesn't change the fundamentals.
But it does, Sturgeon, does it not? Slightly, at the very least. Because you, like many other politicians that seem to be in favour and moving in a direction similar, if not identical to this, all seem to be going down the avenue of suggesting, whether or not being upfront about it, or in not so many words, but suggesting nonetheless, that being transgender, suffering from gender identity disorder, isn't a mental illness of any sorts. Therefore, it should only stand to reason that it should be made a little bit more simplistic for them to be able to change who they are as a person. When the reality of the matter is, this isn't even a conversation that should be taking place, because it should never have been demedicalised. And even if there is an argument to be had in favour of demedicalising it, quite frankly, you can't help but call it all into question, considering the minuscule time frame that this has all happened. In the space of, 3-4 years, it's gone from being chanted at your average protest every day to now being demedicalised and praised by near enough every single person that seems to fall left on the political paradigm. The Sturgeon is no different to this. Making it easier for people to transition does not disguise the fact that this shouldn't be happening at all. You're making it easier for people to live out their fantasies, and whether that be to live a better productive life as a result of transitioning, that's not what I'm getting at here. The main point is, of course, that this is just a clear shift away from ever acknowledging that this was ever considered a mental health issue, not even in the slightest.
Simply makes that process easier, and I hope intends to put more dignity into that process for people who are going through the process of changing their gender. This debate has become, in many countries, very polarised. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to try to depolarise it. The reason why I think it's important to simplify the procedure around gender recognition is that many transgender people go through extreme difficulties in a whole range of different ways, and
most of which is derived from the fact that they've got a mental health issue. I don't understand why that's so hard to compute with the people that campaign for it relentlessly. They seem to blame everybody else for the problems that these people suffer from. But the reality of the matter is the very thing that they're suffering from is responsible for any subsequent problems that they then face. But of course, no, it's society's fault. So we need to make it easier for them. We need to wrap them up in cotton wool because they've got a fragile mental state of mind. And that's society's fault, apparently. Notice how she didn't answer the question, though. If she thinks a woman is a biological woman, or can anybody just identify as a woman? She didn't answer the question.
I think we should be doing everything we can to address that and to recognise their rights and to allow them to express those rights as fully as possible. In my view, some of the concerns that are expressed on the part of women and feminists, while we have to listen and understand that, I think many of those are misplaced. As an ardent, passionate feminist and have been...
I don't agree with the premise that allowing so-called non-binary men and transgender men into women-only spaces will result in an epidemic of rapes and sexual assaults, etc. But if you were a ardent feminist, as Sturgeon is, surely that would cross your mind once or twice. But nonetheless, it does leave the door open for potential incidents to occur in the future. And they always seem to talk about how There's never been recorded incidents before of transgenders assaulting people in washrooms and changing room areas. Well, that's probably because the toilets had been, for the most part, segregated. So if there was a transgender using the toilet or a changing room of the gender they quote-unquote assign as, no, they identify as, sorry, then they were sneaking in, being discreet. But when the rules are somewhat laxed, and it's a lot easier to self-identify as whatever the fuck you will, that does leave the door open for people in the future to potentially exploit. That should be common sense. I thought we lived in a misogynistic rape culture, you know? That should be common sense then, surely. You got to stand by your own logic there, Sturgeon. Or am I missing the mark?
All of my life, I don't see the greater recognition of transgender rights as a threat to me as a woman. Or
because it's not just the greater recognition of trans rights. See, there you go again. It's gone from allowing transgender people to transition easier to now it's greater recognition of trans people. That's two different arguments completely. I mean, make your mind up, eh?
To my feminism. But I think there is a need to bring different parts of this debate together and to try to find the way forward that respects the rights of transgender
rights that they have got.
People and
the only thing that's going to change is it's going to be a lot easier for them to transition.
Recognises and hopefully addresses some of the concerns that are expressed.
First Minister, Peter Smith's my name. I'm from Australia, but I'm a resident of Scotland. I live in Prestwick. I have a Scottish wife.
My mother's from Prestwick.
Very good. And I have 2 Scottish grandchildren, which I'm concerned about, and I'm concerned here about parents' rights. I know that my daughter would not want her minor children to be taken from her if they decided to change their gender or sex. What is your view on parental rights in these matters?
Your faces, man. Wow.
I would agree that children should not be taken from the parents in those circumstances. I'm not sure if there is something more lying behind your question.
Well, in some jurisdictions this has occurred, where children have been taken into care because the parents do not want gender reassignment, drugs and all the rest of it done to their children, because 80% of adolescents grow out of these things as they mature.
Well,
there is a multitude of studies that say figures similar to that. But Sturgeon again dodges this question, or that fact, and tries to implement the LGB in with the T to dismiss it. He's talking about transgender kids, or supposed transgender kids, that are left to their own devices and aren't encouraged to socially transition, grow out of it. And Sturgeon goes on to dismiss it, as you'll see.
I don't want to get too deeply into that debate, because we could probably be here for the rest of the day.
Because you don't want to get involved in that, Sturgeon, because I don't know if she's coming or going. She couldn't answer the question earlier on about what a real woman is. Is it somebody that identifies as a woman, or is it in fact a biological woman? That must be a difficult thing to do, being an ardent feminist, Sturgeon. You know, here she is again. She doesn't want to get into the debate because she doesn't have a fucking clue what she's talking about.
Talking about that, but you know, I'm a great believer. So let me say, nobody wants to see children being taken away from parents, and you know, nobody wants to see parental rights not being given appropriate respect. But I'm also a great believer in the rights of children and young people. And you know, we've been talking here this morning. I've been talking about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and I think it's really important that we also give recognition. And you know, I'm not sure that I would quite as glibly talk about, you know, young people growing out of things.
Well, it's it's transgender quote unquote kids that grow out of it if left to live their life normally, not young people.
I have the privilege of speaking to so many young people, including, you know, transgender young people, you know, gay and
what's gay got to do with transgenders?
And lesbian young people, and the difficulties and the challenges that they face in being themselves, and they have a right to be themselves, can be considerable. And I think our duty.
How many years have gay people had equal rights now? How many years have gays been pandered to? You know what I mean? I think their day is come and gone in regards to equality. Their time is up. They don't need to still proclaim that they're having a terrible existence on this earth because there's so much rampant homophobia that still surrounds us all. The focus is on transgenders, the LGBT gets lumped in with the transgender element of that acronym, but the reality is the same. They all sing from the same hymn sheet that they're all oppressed and victimised and marginalised. That's why Mama Sturgeon's here to save the day.
Is to help and support them, not make...
I don't understand how it could be considered to be supportive for it to remain confidential between a school and a kid if a kid starts to question their gender/gender identity, or in fact decides to transition to another gender. And of course, the implementation of your compulsory LGBT education that you seem to continuously brag about as if it's a beautiful thing, when quite frankly it's based on nothing but lies, because the whole reason that people were kind of okay with it to begin with was because they proclaimed that they were going to just teach the fundamentals, the history of the LGBT, and to remove the stigma that's attached to gay marriage. And of course, in the back door was snuck in bullshit about gender identities and gender spectrums. And of course, with that sort of implementation encroaching into the academia, it's an inevitability that one or two kids are going to end up confused at some point. But of course, it's okay because it gets to stay confidential. There's a multitude of things wrong with that. The fact that she made it compulsory but still can't understand why some people have an issue with it is beyond me. It shouldn't have been made compulsory. That is just your way of trying to show, well, look at me, I'm progressive, I told you. It's fucking downright evil. I've got no problem with homosexuals, etc. But I do draw the line with teaching this bullshit to children, sexualising children, all while filling their head with a load of shit that non-binaries exist and that gender is a spectrum, all in the name of diversity and inclusion, all the while they feminise boys and make it all about empowering little girls. That's diversity.
The challenges they face even more difficult. One of the things I'm very proud of as First Minister, we're a country that has a very good record on LGBTI rights, and we...
Did you ask the people of Scotland before you went ahead with this? I don't think you did. I think you just went ahead and did it. And then you conceded to every single demand that the campaigners and activists demanded of you. And then, of course, your little feminist organisation that you set up, the Council of Feminists, that have conjured up their fucking version of the LGBT brigade. I wonder what you're going to do with that. I wonder if she's going to give that the green light too.
Become the first country in the world to embed LGBTI education into the school curriculum, and I think that's really important, and it's grounded on that, respect for the rights of children and young people.
That's why, of course, that if a child has an issue with a kid from the opposing gender entering their washrooms or their living arrangements, if they happen to be on a school trip, they're in the wrong, and they need to be taught all about the ethos of inclusion. This does affect the rights of other children, but that is disregarded while you pander to a supposed non-binary or transgender that, until the education is properly implemented, don't really exist. Man. Peace.